think we need to understand what poverty is all about. First, we have two types of poverty. One is material poverty, I don't have money. Another one is a spiritual poverty, I don't know who I am. I think we don't need to confuse this because many people who might be materially poor have a tremendous sense of self-identity. For example, Bhutan. You know, Bhutan is a poor country, but it's a country with very high level of self-identity. We have countries like Costa Rica, which are middle-income countries, you know, with very high level of self-identity. The Costa Ricans know what they want. We have rich countries like Sweden and Norway with very high levels of self-identity. So when we talk about a map between material transformation and a spiritual transformation, we are in a plane where we need to look at this in a combined way. Second, to analyze poverty, to evaluate whether we are eliminating poverty or not, we need to focus not on poverty, but on the creation of wealth, because it's the alternative forms of wealth creation that create poverty. It's the creation of wealth for a few that create poverty for a large majority. It's not like these guys are poor and somehow parachuted poor. No, they are a consequence of wealth creation. And so as much as we deal and face the issue of poverty, we need to also learn how to manage wealth. This is central to this crisis because one of the interesting issues of the world crisis of today is that this is the crisis of the rich. You know, we are talking about the crisis of banks. We are not talking about the crisis of Mrs. Gonzalez, you know, in El Salvador. Nobody cares to discuss this. The newspapers, you know, media is full of issues regarding the loss of wealth of the rich. Is not talking about the loss of wealth of the poor. So when we talk about poverty, we need also to talk about wealth creation and the rich. Now, whether the World Bank or any other bank will resolve the poverty issue or not is a big question mark. Empirically, in my personal view, we are losing the battle on poverty. Even if we comply with the Millennium Development Goals, which we are not complying with them, which is the first Millennium Development Goal, you know, and we are not very far from 2012, you know, this is not something, or 2015, is not really far. Even if we resolve and cut by half the level of people in absolute poverty, because of demographic factors, there will be another billion of people in poor areas. And now we know through this crisis that we lost 20% in the purchasing power of the poor, so the poverty line moved from $1 a day to $1.20 per day. So whether the World Bank or anyone else will be able to resolve poverty, I have doubts. But let me tell you one thing. It is essential that any program the World Bank or anyone else does has the poor first, the poor second, and the poor third. It's not something that you create to patronize the poor. Okay, I know what the poor want. Please accept this technology. No, this is not the way it's going to happen. Secondly, we cannot put as a yardstick of progress in terms of poverty alleviation the yardstick of the rich. This doesn't work. It's not possible. This is an oxymoron. Who told you the poor wants to have a Cadillac? Why do you create an economy that only functions through consumption? So now, in this crisis, we are indebting developing countries so they can increase their consumption and make the poor new consumers, so somewhere, somehow, in the end, they will have, you know, the wealth of the rich. This is not possible. In addition, there are no resources, material resources or financial resources in the world for us to become all equal in terms of purchasing power, in terms of wealth. I give you one example. This line, this line defining the poor of 1.20 means around $1,600 per year of a family of four. In Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, for the same family of four, the minimum income of a family below which you are poor is $54,000 a year. So there is no way you can go to Africa and say, you know, we are going to create an economic model that will make you to make $54,000 a year. Why? Why do we need to grow more? Why do we need to get the poor to the $50,000 mark? These are all fallacies of economics that we need to correct. And this crisis is proving that we have less and less an ability to resolve the problems of the poor. Another issue about World Bank and poverty is that countries are losing the sovereignty in economic policy. And as they lose sovereignty in economic policy, internal domestic policy becomes weaker, weaker, and weaker, and weaker, and so it's the world deciding what they have to do. For example, if you have a European central bank, naturally European banks or central banks of European countries have less power in managing monetary policy. The same thing in the United States. If the Federal Reserve, is the one commanding, it's very difficult for individual banks to control and manage monetary policy. It is happening the same thing in Africa in relation to the French franc of the past and so on. So countries are losing sovereignty through the creation of new authorities that weaken domestic authority. Two, there are many international agreements and imposed international agreements on countries that do not allow them to have sovereign social policies. And this is central for poverty alleviation. I would not like to be really the Minister of Social Work or the Minister of Labor in some developing countries, because the degree for me to maneuver my policy is almost zero. These countries are managed by ministers of finance, economy, and public works. This is what really dominates the government. So as we lose sovereignty in social policy, the war against poverty is diminishing to zero. And America, this country, is facing a very similar situation today. That it lost sovereignty because the world has no frontiers. There is no way to limit the transfer of capital and the transfer of labor, despite of the millions of dollars to have a wall in Rio Grande. It's very difficult to actually do that. And so you lose sovereignty because you make a move, and then this move not only creates incentive for local people, but creates incentive for the rest of the world. I used to say when I was at the bank that if we do not resolve the problems of Africa in Africa, Africans will be in New York City. Believe me, this is no way to stop people migrating to where it's more material wealth. So it is fundamental that the World Bank does something to dent into this, but it's not up to the World Bank, it's up to the government. It's not up to the government, it's up to their democracy, it's up to their organization. So I think this is important to take into account.